everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for coming tonight. I just wanted to reintroduce Dr. Schrader Polczer and welcome you all. If you wouldn't mind, I would like to start us off with a prayer. Dear God, thank you for this time together. Thank you for the ability to just bring us all together and listen to interesting people talk. I ask that you just open our minds and open our hearts to what Dr. Polczer has to say. It's in your name we pray. Amen. Okay, let's welcome Dr. Polczer.
All right, is my microphone working? Great. Okay, so this afternoon we're going to kind of continue our discussion from this morning. Well, it's related, I would say. This isn't so much about gospel manuscripts. It's more about the meaning of the word Magdalene, right? Now, it might have occurred to some of you this morning, okay, she's saying that some people thought Lazarus' sister Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene. But isn't Mary from Magdala? Did that occur to anybody this morning? Or if it hadn't, it would have soon, right? Because sometimes people think that Mary Magdalene, well, somebody told me this morning they thought it was her last name. It's not her last name. It's a word. It's an Aramaic word. Technically, it means like the word Magdala means tower. Okay, and so what I'm going to be talking about today. Ethan's my slides person. Let's go to this first slide. Sometimes this word Magdalene, hey Magdalene, in Greek is translated as of Magdala. And I'm showing you here some Bible translations that do that. It looks like we've got that in God's Word, the Weymouth New Testament, the New American Bible. These are ones that have translated Magdalene, the Greek word, as of Magdala. But I got to tell you, Magdalene is different than of Magdala. In Greek, it would be apo Magdala. That would be from Magdala. That's not what the word is. The word is Magdalene. So I knew that there was some dissension about this question in antiquity. Sorry, my little thingies here is getting kind of messed up. I had known that different church fathers said different things on this topic. And so I decided I wanted to write an article about this. And so if you wouldn't mind, go to the next one, Ethan. So in 2021, I co-wrote an article with a really important senior scholar named Joan Taylor. I knew that I didn't have the background to tackle this on my own because I am not somebody who does Aramaic or archaeology. I do Greek and the Gospels and Church Fathers. So the two of us teamed up and we co-wrote this article in the Journal of Biblical Literature, which is like the Harvard Theological Review. They are top journals. And I knew that I wanted to get it in a top journal because that's how you can change the conversation. So we got that in there, and it was called The Meaning of Magdalene, a review of literary evidence. And our central question in this article was, and I'm going to summarize this article for you now. So this morning was the Harvard Theological Review article. This afternoon is the Journal of Biblical Literature article. How clear is it that Hey Magdalene, the Magdalene, was understood by ancient people to refer to Mary coming from a city called Magdala by the Sea of Galilee? Has anybody here been to the Holy Land? Ruth told me she had. Anybody else been to the Holy Land? Did you go to the place that's called Magdala? And did they say, this is Mary Magdalene's hometown? Right. Okay, that's a place by the Sea of Galilee. They don't like me at that location. They don't like me and Joan there, okay, because we're kind of exposing that there's a problem with that designation. Okay, so actually, we showed that the first time anybody said that was the 6th century. Okay, so we'll come to that. All right, so next slide. All right, so there it is, Magdala in Israel. It's very beautiful, and it's got this synagogue that they uncovered. Actually, there's a couple synagogues there. And Ethan, next one, we've got the Magdala stone, and this was uncovered in 2009. Everybody was really excited because there's a stone inside the synagogue that is a representation of the Jewish temple. That is pretty cool. And now I am not arguing that there are important first century synagogues to be found in this location. I just don't think it was called Magdala. It was called Tarique. This is a really important Jewish town that is mentioned by people like Pliny and Trajan, and they all describe this town as being called Tarichae. And some later people said, oh, Tarichae and Magdala were the exact same place in antiquity, even though nobody ever said that in antiquity. This synagogue is a very important first century Jewish synagogue uncovered in Tarichae, okay? And it's only in the 6th century that the town got the name Magdala. And so I'm going to trace that history of how the town got that name, Magdala, and why people started to associate it with Mary Magdalene. So I have no problem with this beautiful stone and these wonderful first century synagogues. They are real. It's just that it doesn't really have anything to do with Mary Magdalene, other than her being a Jewish woman who lived also in Israel in the first century, like these were Jews worshiping in Israel in the first century. Okay, next slide. So, beyond the issue of whether that particular place was called Magdala or Tarichae, I want to emphasize that there were many, many places in the first century that were called Migdal. Now, Migdal is the Hebrew equivalent of Magdala. They both just mean tower. Migdal is the Hebrew pronunciation. Magdala is the Aramaic pronunciation. Aramaic was the language spoken in Jesus' day. So look at this. We've got Migdal Gad. This is a tower Migdal Gad in the south. Migdal Eder, that means Tower of the Flock. That's also in the south. Migdal Sena. Then there's Migdal Malha. There's Migdal Nunaya, which is not too far from where Tarichae was, and Migdal El. So look at this. We've got Migdal Thawantha. It just means tower of this, tower of that. We've got a lot of towns like Fort. We've got Fort Smith, but there's also, Fort Collins. There's a lot of places called Fort, right? It's really not unlike that. If I were to say Fort, not everybody would immediately think of Fort Smith, right? Okay, that's what people are arguing, is that when you said the word Magdala, everybody knew you were talking about that one by the Sea of Galilee. And that in itself is also very dubious. Okay, so you can see there we've got lots of first century Migdals. Okay, next slide. So here's the root of the word. Gadal is the Hebrew word, and it means to be great or large. And so when you vocalize it with vowels differently in Hebrew versus Aramaic. So Migdal in Hebrew is tower, and Magdal in Aramaic is tower. Now Syriac is an even later stage. It's very similar to Aramaic, but it's sort of a later stage of the language. And in Syriac manuscripts, Mary is referred to as Miriam Magdalaitha. And that Isa ending indicates a feminine person. It's like the ending S. So let's say, I'm from Portland, Oregon originally. You could call me a Portlandess. Or you could call the ladies in this room, they are all a Fort Smithess, right? Okay. Or it's kind of like the Duke and the Duchess, right? The S is like a feminine ending. Etha is the feminine ending in Syriac. So people who were speaking basically Jesus' language said, Mary, the Tower S. That's really what it means. Mary, the Tower S. And the same thing with this Greek ending ene. Magdalene, there's the Aramaic is tower, but then because they're writing in Greek, they put this Greek ending on it, this Greek feminine ending. So Magdalene and Magdalitha mean the same thing. They mean Tower S. That's the most literal translation of the word Magdalene, okay? Or Magdalitha, as the people speaking Jesus' own language would write it. Okay, so moving on. So now let's go to actual writers in antiquity, and we're going to kind of move forward chronologically as to how these ancient writers understood Mary Magdalene's name. The earliest evidence we have for this question is found in the Gospel of Luke. Now, unlike the other gospel writers who all refer to Mary as Maria he Magdalene, Mary the Toweress, Luke does a slightly different thing. He says Mary called Magdalene, Maria he Kalumene Magdalene. This is when he introduces Mary Magdalene in chapter 8 alongside Joanna and Susanna, and this is when he says that Mary was healed of demons by Jesus in Luke's gospel. Okay? So Maria he Kalumene Magdalene. So Mary the one called Magdalene. What he's doing here is he's using this verb kaleo, which means to call, and he's turning it into a participle, which is sort of like making a noun out of that verb. So if you go to the next slide, I don't want to overwhelm you, but you can see how many times Luke uses this term kalumene. That's the feminine form. Kalumenos, or kalumenon is the masculine form. You can see when he's referencing Elizabeth, it's Elizabeth, she who is kalumene stera, called sterile or barren. Okay? Elizabeth is called barren. Simon is called the zealot. Martha has a sister, kalumene, called Mary. We've got a man called Zacchaeus, Judas called Iscariot, a young man, kalumenu, called Saul, right? These are names or nicknames. Simon called Peter, right? None of these have anything to do with their place, their location, okay? This is their name or their nickname, okay? So now you can move to the next slide, and you can see that when Luke introduces people according to their place name, again, sorry for so much text, but he doesn't use kalumenos or kalumene. He's not using that kaleo word. He says, Jesus the Nazarene, Simon a certain Cyrenian, Joseph from the Jewish town of Arimathea, Nicholas a convert from Antioch, Lucius the Cyrenian. This one's particularly interesting in the book of Acts because, Luke wrote both Luke and Acts, same author, okay? So when he's describing Simeon and Lucius, he kind of does both. Look at this. He says, Simeon kalumenos niger. That means Simeon called the black. Okay? That's like a nickname. It's not where he's from. And Lucius ho Kyranios, Lucius the Cyrenian. This verse right here, Acts 13:1, shows you the contrast between how Luke introduces somebody with a nickname versus Luke introducing somebody according to where they come from. He only uses kalumene, kalumenos for nicknames. He doesn't use it according to the location they come from. So Luke's first century evidence, which is the closest we can get, seems to indicate that Magdalene is a nickname, at least in Luke's view, because that is how he uses this word called, only for nicknames. Okay, so next, let's look at the next earliest person to comment on Mary's name that we can get to, and that is Origen of Alexandria. Has anybody heard of him before? He's a 3rd century, very prolific church father who spent most of his time in Alexandria, but at a certain point in his life, he moved to Caesarea because the bishop in Alexandria didn't like him very much. So he also did a lot of writing in Caesarea, which is basically where Tel Aviv is today. So he's writing in the 3rd century. We only unfortunately have what he wrote in a later Latin translation. But if this is an accurate translation, this is what Origen wrote. Many were looking at Jesus. They were specially named. They were greater ministers and better followers. Maria Magdalene, most appropriate for the name of her provenance, which is called Magdala. So Origen does seem to think it has to do with the place that she's from. And he says the word Magdala is translated as that place is magnifying. It's interesting because he's saying it's where she's from, but he's also saying that the place where she's from has meaning. He says Maria Magdalena of magnification. Remember that Hebrew root word gadol means to make great or large. and then when you put the M at the beginning, the preformative mem, it makes it into a noun. So make great or large, and you make it into a noun, means tower. But he's saying it means magnification. Do you understand how gadol means to make great or large? And that when you make a noun out of something large, you can make a tower, right? Or you can just say magnification, which was Origen's understanding, okay? She had followed him and ministered to him, and she looks at the ministry of his passion. She was among the prominent ones. Now notice here that Origen is understanding this as an unknown place. It's not a well-known city, but it's something that indicates something special about Mary. She is hailing from a town called Magdala, but it's not Migdal Nunaya, it's not Migdal Eder or Migdal Sabaya. He understands the etymology of her name as relating to gadol, stemming from that verbal root, to be great. So look at the next slide. I want to show you, here's like a real close-up of Israel. This is where Origen was in Caesarea when he was writing. And this is where people today say Magdala was. This is less than 2 days' walk. And scholars like Richard Bauckham, who's an important British scholar of the New Testament, he wrote a whole monograph talking about how Magdala was surely the best known place of Magdala in the 1st century. Everybody knew it. And it's like, well, if everybody knew it, why isn't Origen saying he knows it? He seems not to know it at all, even though he could have walked there. Okay? So this is how close they were. And I would say that in the 1st century, this would not say Magdala. It would say Tereke. It would say Tereke. Nobody actually attributed this to Magdala until the 6th century, as we will see as we keep moving. Okay, let's see what's next. I think we've got Peter of Alexandria next. Now, this is just a few decades after Origen. Peter is writing at about 300 AD, okay? He was the bishop of Alexandria in Egypt. And he wrote that Jesus was first seen by Cephas so that Peter might become a human in place of Adam. He thinks that Peter's the new Adam. The stolid and steadfast rock in place of the earthy and weak man, who was Adam. And also Mary Magdalene, similarly, in place of Eve. So Mary Magdalene is the new Eve. Interesting, right? That is being mistress, Kyrieusa. You know how we say Kyrie eleison? That means Lord, have mercy. Kyrieusa is like a feminine version of that, being a mistress or like a lady, right? And fortified with towers. Pepergomene. In Greek, that means fortified with towers. Instead of being Eve in the serpent way of life. This is how the names are translated. Peter of Alexandria, just a few decades after Origen, thinks that Mary's name is a nickname. It's referring to her being fortified with towers because she's the new Eve. She's like Peter is the rock, and Mary Magdalene is fortified with towers. Okay? So you can see that Origen and Peter of Alexandria have slightly different understandings of what her name means, but they both associate it with something to do with her character, being great. Okay, so next we have Eusebius, writing again just a few decades later. He has a funny idea. He thinks that there's 2 Magdalens. And this is because if you look at Matthew's and John's gospel, they have 2 slightly different stories of how the Marys come to the tomb and what time, but they both feature Mary Magdalene. And so he's like, oh, we can explain this by saying that there was 2 Marys from a town called Magdalene, okay? He doesn't think she's from a town called Magdala. He thinks she's from a town called Magdalene, and he doesn't know where it is. Eusebius is also writing from Caesarea, the place that Origen was, which is Tel Aviv, right? Again, he could have walked to that place that you visited that is called Magdala today. He could have gone, but he doesn't know that place. He thinks that she's from some other place called Magdalene, which he doesn't know. And he thinks that there's 2 Mary Magdalenes. The way that we're certain that he didn't think she came from Magdala is, if you go to the next slide, he has another work called the Onomasticon. Eusebius was trying to be very helpful and catalog every single place in the Holy Land so that if people read his book, they would know where all these places were. He's like, well, today in the 4th century, this is where this place is, this is where this place is. He looks at the entire Bible and he goes through every location and he explains where they all are and what's happening with them today. He's talking about Joshua, and he only mentions one Magdala. He says, Magdala of the tribe of Judah. If you go, actually, so I'm so sorry to do this to you, Ethan, but would you mind going back to slide number 4? No, slide number 5. That one. Oh, one more. Yeah. So Eusebius, writing in the 4th century, he does know a place called Magdala. It's this one. Way down here. It's not in Galilee. It's nowhere near the Sea of Galilee. It's very close. It's even further south than Jerusalem. It's kind of closer to Gaza, actually. Okay? Migdal Gad. That's the only Magdala he knows. This really undermines Richard Bauckham's big, thick book, saying that was the one Magdala that everybody knew in the 1st century. It's the one by the Sea of Galilee. Well, then why does Eusebius think that there's only one? And it's this one way down here in Judea. It's nothing to do with Galilee, right? Not only that, he doesn't think Mary Magdalene is from there. He thinks she's from a town called Magdalene, and he doesn't associate her with this one at all. Sorry. So you can see, Eusebius has his own opinion, which is different than the opinion of Peter, which is different than the opinion of Origen. And Luke maybe aligns with Peter, but they're not the same. So we can go back. I'm going to cough. Stephen, would you mind going back? Yeah, one more forward. Okay. Now we're getting to St. Jerome. I mentioned him briefly this morning. Jerome is the guy who translated the Latin Vulgate at the end of the 4th century, and he lived into the 5th century. And he has his own idea about what Mary's name means. He seems to have thought that Mary Magdalene was Mary of Bethany. He seemed to think that they were the same woman. And he writes, Mary, properly the Magdalene, because of her diligence and her ardent faith, received the name of the tower. Oh, thank you. Received the name of the tower or toweress. She deserved to see the risen Christ first before the apostles. Remember, Jerome was like the smartest guy in the entire Roman Empire, which is why the Pope made him like translate the entire Bible from Hebrew and Greek. He knew both. He knew Hebrew and he knew Greek. And by the way, he was living in the Holy Land when he wrote this. Earlier in his life, he was in Rome, but then he moved to the Holy Land. And when he lived in the Holy Land, he did not think that Mary Magdalene came from Magdala. He assumed she was Mary of Bethany, and he thought that she got this title, Mary the Magdalene, because she was the first to see the risen Christ. Jerome did know several places called Tower of something. He wrote a lot of letters. He went to a lot of places in the Holy Land, but he didn't mention that Mary Magdalene had anything to do with them. He does not mention a Magdala by the Sea of oh my gosh. He doesn't mention a Magdala by the Sea of Galilee. He thinks that Mary, the sister of Martha, was honored in Bethany. Okay. So Jerome again lines up more with what Peter of Alexandria seems to be saying, that Magdalene is a nickname or an honorific given to Mary. All right, so let's see what's next. Okay, now let's get to people who don't like Mary Magdalene. The Talmud. Of course, Jewish people and early Christians are not getting along very well with one another. And they seem to be sort of making fun of Jesus in the Babylonian Talmud, which was sort of compiled between the 3rd and the 6th century. And here, you see sort of rabbis talking to one another. And they're asking, why did they call him Ben Stada? This is like a reference to Jesus. It's like it's a negative reference to Jesus, when he was the son of Pandera. Does anybody know this rumor that Jesus was, this is a rumor that you see in some 2nd century sources. Celsus, who is sort of an enemy of Christianity, he and also these Jewish sources think that Jesus was conceived illegitimately when a Roman soldier accosted his mother. So some very early rumors was that Jesus was sort of a bastard son of a Roman soldier named Panthera. And you get some interesting Christian writings responding to that rumor. And so this is also a response. This is kind of continuing that rumor in the Talmud, in rabbinic sources. They say, why are they calling Jesus ben Stada when he was the son of Panthera? They think he's this bastard son of the Roman soldier. And this rabbi says, his mother's husband, who acted as his father, was named Stada. This is, I think, a reference to Joseph. But the one who had relations with his mother and fathered him was named Panthera. And then another rabbinic text, the Gemara asks, wasn't his mother's husband Papos ben Yehuda? This is discussing like who Joseph was. His mother was named Stada, and he was named Ben Stada after her. These are just sort of interesting rumors about Jesus' lineage. The Gemara asks, wasn't his mother Miriam who braided women's hair? You can see that they're confusing Jesus' mother with Mary Magdalene, because the word braided women's hair is Magdala. Wasn't his mother Miriam Magdala? This is what this rabbinic source says. Obviously, their information is pretty garbled. They've got all these negative rumors about Jesus. They think that Jesus' mother is the same woman as Mary Magdalene. And they think that this word Magdala has to do with her braiding hair. This is just basically a lot of trash talking of Jesus that the rabbis are doing, okay? So it shouldn't be equated with history, obviously. But what's going on here is that it is connected to that word gadal, that Hebrew word gadal, to make great. Apparently was also related to the piling up of hair the hairdressers did. Okay, so when you're making something great, Magdala could also be used to reference a hairdresser. Isn't that interesting? So we know that gadal in Mary Magdalene's name, it is the root of it, and there's different ways of interpreting to make great. You can make it great into a tower. You can make great into something being magnified, or you can make it great into a big old pile of hair on the top of the head. So this is an interesting, but what's interesting about this particular example is that they're speaking again in something that's close to Jesus' own language. And these people do not understand it to be a place that she's from. Even if they think that Mary Magdalene and Jesus' mother Mary are the same woman, they do not understand the word Magdala or Magdalene to reference where she's from. They think that it's a sort of pun to do with a hairdresser piling up hair. There's no mention of Mary's place of origin, whether they think it to be Nazareth or Magdala. They think it's some sort of nickname. Of course, they make it into a negative nickname. But it's, of course, in the language that's very close to Aramaic. All right? So I also want to emphasize that there is no mention of a place called Magdala in any of our gospel manuscripts. So this idea of a Magdala by the Sea of Galilee is sort of a later creation. So where does it come from? I think the next slide will tell us. Yes. Here we are in European Pilgrim Reports. We get some, there's a German Archdeacon Theodosius, and he says that when he goes on pilgrimage to Israel, he says, from Tiberias to Magdala, where Lady Mary was born, it's been like 2 miles. From Magdala to the 7 Springs, where Christ baptized the apostles, 2 miles. Okay? So what's going on here is that there was a place kind of called Migdal-Nunaya by the Sea of Galilee that was close to Tarique. It was like about 2 miles away from Tarique. And people who did not think that Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene needed to know where Mary Magdalene was from. So around this time, when they found a town in Israel that they visited, they said, this must have been where Mary Magdalene was from. Could we go back to that map slide one more time, Ethan? Yeah. Oh, one more forward. Yeah. Okay. So this is the first time that we have pilgrims going to Israel, and they're going around, and some people, as we can see, people like Peter of Alexandria think it's a nickname, and Jerome thinks it's a nickname. But people like Origen think that it's a place where she's from. And Origen was very influential, especially in the East. So Origen is writing, and his work is sort of becoming prominent in the East. Jerome is writing, and his work is prominent in the West. And we start to get this sort of divide, where people in the West think that Mary of Bethany is the same woman as Mary Magdalene, and people in the East think that Mary Magdalene and Mary of Bethany are two different women. And actually, if you look at the entirety of church history, you can see this divide. In the East, nobody ever thought that Mary Magdalene should be identified with Luke's sinful anointer, which we'll talk about in a second, and Mary of Bethany. So there's this sort of divide in interpretation history. And it's around this time that some people who like Mary Magdalene and they want to venerate her, and they're going to Israel, and they don't think she's from Bethany. And then they come down, and then they come across this town, Migdal Nunaya, and they're like, Migdal, well, that must be where she's from. And it's in the 6th century that we first get somebody saying that. This 6th century Pilgrim Report says that's where she's from. And it sticks. So we can go back to the slide that we were just on. And then we get this Anglo-Saxon nun in the 8th century who's gone all the way from England down to the Holy Land. And she says they went around the Sea of Galilee and they came near to the village Magdalene. So you can see, all right, so sort of in the 6th, 7th, 8th centuries, it really starts to take traction. That is the place that today is called Magdala, that today has the church built and say this is where Mary Magdalene is from. But before this, we found no evidence of anybody ever saying that that place by the Sea of Galilee should be associated with Mary Magdalene. Okay? So next slide. Now this is the one who had the biggest influence of all. This is Pope Gregory the Great. So he wrote a sermon in 591 AD on my birthday, which is also Pope Leo's birthday. And so I'm hoping that the two of us are going to have a conversation about this. We'll see. Pope Leo wrote in 591 AD that the one who Luke calls a sinful woman who anoints Jesus, very early in the gospel, nowhere near Bethany, whom John calls Mary, the story we looked at this morning, Mary of Bethany, who anoints Jesus in Bethany right before his passion. We believe to be the Mary Magdalene from whom 7 devils were ejected. This doesn't actually make any sense because Luke says that 7 devils were ejected from Mary Magdalene, as we just saw. And that woman who anoints Jesus, the sinful anointer, is a totally different woman who isn't named. And so Luke thinks that she's 2 different women. And so it doesn't actually make sense what Gregory's doing here. He's basically saying that 2 different characters in Luke, one who's anonymous and one who's named, should be identified as the same woman. Anyway, he says, we believe them all to be the same woman. And what did the 7 devils signify, if not for all the vices? It is clear, brothers, that the woman previously used the unguent to perfume her flesh in forbidden acts. Where did he get that from? It is not clear. If you read your Bible, first of all, it never even says that quite of the sinner from the city in Luke chapter 7, who is again totally anonymous. She does anoint Jesus in Luke's gospel, but it is a very different setting. She's at a house of a man named Simon the Pharisee, and Jesus tells a story about the one who loves much and is forgiven. He says, like, because of her great love, she has been, oh gosh, I should have this memorized. It's in Luke chapter 7. And he says, because she sinned much, because she's been forgiven much, she loved much. That's the story in Luke chapter 7. He says, Simon, she gave me a kiss and she cleaned my feet, and what did you give me? Like, she's much better. She was very sinful, but she's been forgiven and she loved much. Okay? That is a totally different story than the one we were talking about this morning, where in Bethany, right before Jesus is raised from the dead, a woman comes and anoints Jesus. And then she's criticized for spending too much, for wasting the ointment. And Jesus says, let her save it for the day of my burial. And actually in Mark and Matthew's gospel, he says, what she has done, wherever the gospel is preached, what she has done will be told in memory of her, right? So the Bethany anointing is seen as wholly positive. The woman is portrayed wholly positively, and it's seen as like a prelude to the Passion. It happens right before Jesus' Passion begins in John, Mark, and Matthew, and it's in Bethany in all three of those. It's only in John that she's named as Mary, okay? Luke's story is totally different. But what's happened here is that Gregory has collapsed them all into one. And he thinks that that anointing woman is Mary Magdalene, and hence, Mary Magdalene's a prostitute. This happens in 591 AD, and this has the most sticking power of all of these portraits that we've seen. But you can see there was a lot. There was a lot of different portraits. Mary Magdalene was portrayed wholly positively, really, until this. And this wasn't until the end of the 6th century. This is when the doctrine of Mary as a prostitute first shows up. I was asked to write a handbook chapter for the Oxford Handbook of Mary Magdalene, and I wrote the chapter on Mary Magdalene in patristic interpretation, and I looked at everything. I'm like, was it really Gregory? Was he really the first one to say this? And the answer is yes. Gregory was the first one to make this leap of saying that the sinful woman in Luke was Mary Magdalene. Now, I do want to say that many people before Gregory thought that Mary of Bethany was Mary Magdalene. So what Gregory has done is he's brought three different women together. He said that Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are the same person. People had been doing that for a while. We have St. Ambrose did that in the 4th century. We have the Manichaeans saying that in the 3rd century, and Hippolytus of Rome thinks so too. We have 3rd and 4th century sources saying that Mary of Bethany and Mary Magdalene are the same woman. But what Gregory does is he says, oh, and that other anointing woman from Luke, who's the sinner from the city, she's the same woman too. So Gregory slaps on Luke's description of the anointing woman onto this previous interpretation of Mary of Bethany as Mary Magdalene that had been happening for quite a while. So, what I want to basically emphasize here with this talk is that despite this modern view, this very widespread view that Mary came from a place called Magdala, the idea that Hey Magdalene simply references a well-known city by the Sea of Galilee, it's not supported by ancient authors. We don't get anybody saying that until the 6th century. And I think you can go to the last slide. Okay? The word Magdalene has always been read in various ways throughout history. It's quite possible that Mary Magdalene's nickname indicates her position as one of Jesus' closest disciples, just as Mary is sort of the toweress, which Peter of Alexandria said, and Peter is the rock, right? These might be nicknames that Jesus gave to his closest disciples, or James and John, the sons of thunder. The ancient position, this is the main thing that I wanted to bring home, especially for those of you who came to my talk this morning. The ancient position that Mary Magdalene hailed from Bethany remains within the realm of sensible exegetical possibility. I'm saying that Lazarus' sister Mary, now I'm talking just about the Gospel of John here, okay? Because as I was saying this morning, my theory is that Martha and Mary in Luke's Gospel, who don't have a brother and who seem to be in Galilee, I think that they're a totally different family in Luke than Lazarus and Mary in Bethany and John. And I think John suggests that this woman who anoints Jesus, Mary, he's implying that she should be identified with Mary Magdalene. So the possibility that she came from Bethany and got the nickname Mary the Toweress remains within the realm of possibility. So what we're calling for is that future scholars and translators should no longer say Mary of Magdala in biblical translations. Instead, they should leave it untranslated and just say Mary the Magdalene. Okay? So So that's the second article that I wanted to share with you. And now we have some time. If anybody has any questions in the world about anything to do with Mary Magdalene or the manuscripts or the meaning of that word, I am happy to answer them. I'm here for you. So any question you might have about Mary Magdalene, I'm happy to answer. Yeah. Mhm. History? There. Hmm. Well, it does say that Mary Magdalene supported Jesus' ministry. It says that throughout Luke, Matthew, and Mark. It does say that. John, she's just sort of surprisingly just mentioned at the cross. I guess that's also true. Well, Matthew and Mark introduce her at the cross and say that she had supported him when he was in Galilee. And some people interpret that as saying that she's from Galilee, and I'm saying, it doesn't say that in the text. It just says that she and other women supported him while he was in Galilee. It never says that she's from Galilee. Yeah. Peter of Alexandria. We can go back to that slide if Ethan doesn't mind. Kyriousa. Yeah, it's like Kyrie means Lord, so it's basically like lady. Kyrie means Lord, and usa is like the feminine ending, so it's like the equivalent of Lord. Lady, being lady. We can say mistress if you like. Being lady is what Kyriousa means. Yeah, being a lady. Yeah. I mean, this is actually, I should mention that this particular quote was discovered about a year and a few months ago by my colleague Jeremiah Coogan, who is at a seminary in Berkeley. And we had already published the Journal of Biblical Literature article, and this is a very obscure quotation, and he found it because he was looking at one particular manuscript of Peter of Alexandria, and he's like, do you guys know this? I'm like, oh my gosh, Jeremiah, this is fantastic. And so this is the one thing that I presented today that isn't in the Journal of Biblical Literature article, but we were able to include it in the Oxford Handbook of Mary Magdalene. So this is really crucial because Jerome is like 412 AD, but this is over a century earlier that we have somebody saying that the word Magdalene is a nickname. Yeah. Hmm. Well, it doesn't seem that she has a husband anywhere in the New Testament because she's always mentioned by herself. And usually when someone is married, they're referenced by their husband or maybe by their children. Usually a woman is defined by like the men around them, like Mary of James or Joanna, the wife of Herod's steward, right? That's usually how they are introduced. And Mary isn't introduced that way. It just says Mary the Magdalene. There is a text called the Gospel of Philip, which is like one of these sort of texts that didn't make it into the Bible, that says that Mary Magdalene was the companion of Jesus and that he loved her more than all the other disciples. And you could see how that would be controversial. And it's very interesting that it doesn't say wife, it says companion. But that's of course a text that literally survives in one copy, and it says that on one page. And so we can't equate that with history. People said a lot of things back then. We also have Clement of Alexandria, who's a 2nd century church father, who says that the Lord did not marry. So Gospel of Philip is 2nd century and Clement of Alexandria is 2nd century, and one of them says that Mary Magdalene's the companion of Jesus, and the other one says the Lord did not marry. So the answer is shrug. I mean, you go as far back as possible and different people are saying different things. We can't get to the history. The Gospels are the oldest, and Mary Magdalene is not spoken of as having a husband or sons. So she was probably independent. She seems to have been financially independent as well, because she was supporting Jesus financially. Which, by the way, also agrees with the description of Mary of Bethany, who has a very expensive jar of ointment. How could she afford that? And perhaps she and Lazarus had their own home, right? So there's a few reasons to think. But, well, Gregory the Great said, yes, she made all that money from her whoring. That's what Gregory the Great says. Like, where did you get that from? He was just sort of making this stuff up. We have no idea where Mary Magdalene got her money from, but there's certainly no indication anywhere in the Bible that Mary Magdalene was anything other than a very positive figure. This idea that Jesus healed her of 7 demons would have made her more like the Gerasene demoniac, right? You know, or like the guy who like is breaking out of his chains and going around the tombs. You know, he's a demoniac who Jesus healed. Nobody thinks that that guy's a male prostitute, right? Just because you have demons doesn't mean that you're a prostitute, right? Or a sex worker. So, yeah, I think that Gregory did a real disservice to Christian history there, and it's something that scholars like me have to spend our lives clearing up. And it's been mostly cleared up, but maybe some of you still thought that she was a prostitute coming in today. I don't know, but it's the constant work of scholars to clear up that that's an invention of Gregory the Great in the 6th century. Mm-hmm. Oh. Right. Well, no. So Jeremiah was the manuscript, I think, was published maybe 100 years ago. It's in the Ohrid National Museum, I think maybe in like Macedonia or something. Sometimes a museum or a library will have just one manuscript that a scholar visiting the library or the museum is like, oh, look at this. Right. And so, well, Jeremiah wasn't the one who published it first. I think it was published maybe 100 years ago or maybe 70 years ago by a scholar who had visited the museum and transcribed it. And he says, oh, look at this, an obscure writing of Peter of Alexandria. And he published it in a journal that was also obscure. And nobody was paying attention to his publication, but Jeremiah is a very diligent scholar, and he found this publication. He's like, this is somebody finding a Peter of Alexandria thing that nobody's paid any attention to. And so he called it to my attention, and then I got it into the Oxford Handbook. So good job, Jeremiah, being a very diligent scholar. That's how that thing happens, yeah. It's like, you know, sitting in a museum or a library and some scholar publishes it, and somebody notices that publication 50 years later. I think that Jeremiah was writing about Peter of Alexandria, because that's one of his interests. And when he was reading about Peter of Alexandria, he found this obscure publication, and then he noticed that Peter of Alexandria was talking about the meaning of the name Magdalene. It's like, wow, a lot of people would care about that, so he sent it to me. Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right, well, so people who've gone to seminary will learn that there is one sort of standard critical edition of the Greek New Testament called the Nestle Aland Novum Testamentum Graece. It's blue. And it keeps getting published every 20 years or so. They update it with more recent scholarship. And they're on the 28th edition right now. So I've been working from the 28th edition throughout the entirety of my graduate and doctoral work and scholarly work. But a lot of scholarship, there's sometimes new manuscripts come to light, like a new papyrus might get published that has a slightly different reading, and they need to mention that. Or sometimes people make scholarly arguments, and they do have to get published in places like top-tier journals, like Harvard Theological Review or New Testament Studies or Journal of Biblical Literature. And then they sort of pay attention to what's getting traction and what people are talking about. The committee meets probably all the time, probably every 3 months or something. There's 5 or 6 guys. I wish I could tell you that any one of them were female or a person of color, but they're 100% European white men right now. There was a woman on the committee for a little while. Her name was Barbara Aland. She was the wife of the head editor. Barbara Aland and Kurt Aland were on that committee. So Barbara was on the committee maybe for like 20 years or something, but she passed away recently. And so it's just these 5 or 6 guys who meet, and it's sort of like you just get invited to be on the committee. There's no like formal process. It's like the guys on the committee are like, okay, that guy can be on our committee with us. I'm like, okay. So it's interesting how, but the thing is, I know several of the scholars on the committee, and I have to say they're really incredible scholars and very, very smart men of integrity, who generally I trust. I think it's problematic, though, to have the entire Bible determined by one demographic, which is unfortunately the case. I'm sorry to say. Barbara Alland, yeah, she must have known about this change in Papyrus 66, as did all the committee members, because the change in Papyrus 66, where the one woman's name is crossed out and split into two women that I talked about this morning, that's in there. It's in your Nestle Aland 26th, 27th, and 28th editions, which are all the editions since Papyrus 66 was found in the 1950s. So all of the editions have had that in there, but nobody really followed up on it. And so I'm the first one to say, hey, this woman who was split in two, who a lot of ancient Christians thought was Mary Magdalene, should we look into that, perhaps? And so that's sort of what my work has done. They do meet often because they have to update the entire apparatus and text for the entire New Testament. It's not just John that they're working on. They're about to publish the 29th edition, and I was told that they're turning in the final version in December, which is why I have to go right now. Like, you got to come right now. I'm like, well, my fall break, which is why I'm here, because this is my fall break. And I'm like, well, I finish in Arkansas on Sunday. I could be there by Wednesday. And so they're like, why don't you come on Thursday? So that's why I'm going now. And yeah, no, they do update it every like 20 years or so. And this committee meets, and they have to go through every chapter and just make any updates from new manuscript discoveries, new publications, new papyri, new arguments, and so they're constantly working on it. Yeah. Well, I was a professional musician for a long time, and I wrote a song about Mary Magdalene. And you can find my pop music on the internet if you look me up. I've got a music video of my song Magdalene, and that music video was released before I entered graduate work. And the reason I entered graduate work was because I wrote the song about Mary Magdalene, and I wanted to look at the world's oldest copy of the Gospel of John, and I saw that the woman's name had been crossed out. And I said, what did the scholars do? What did they do when they saw that the name Mary was crossed out? What did they do? They didn't do anything. I was like, really? And so I'm like, I was sending the picture to the top scholars, people like Elaine Pagels and Karen King, and I'm like, look. And they're like, okay, nobody did anything. They're like, and even the person that she said, oh, that's interesting. I'm like, and is nobody going to do anything? I realized that if I did not go and get a graduate degree, nobody was going to do anything. And that is why I entered my master's program and published that. And then when it got published in the Harvard Theological Review, people said, oh, and where are you going to do your doctorate? And I was like, I'm a musician. I just wanted people to know. But it turns out that my brain was good at this, and nobody was doing it. And that means I have a career, honestly, because there's very few female textual critics, I'm sorry to say. And so I think it helps to have, my brain happens to work well in that way, and most people whose brains do that happen to be male. And this is why I say it's so important for women to learn Greek. A lot of times it's very hard. Greek is hard. And so I've heard women say to me, oh, I just let the guys do that. And then I just look at their translation, and I'm like, you cannot do that. You cannot do that, because if you learn Greek, that makes you dangerous. I can look at that manuscript, Papyrus 66, and I know what that hypodiastole is. I know what's going on with that comma, because I learned Greek. And so I always say to women in seminary, I don't care if it's hard. Just crack the whip. Just do it again. More flashcards, more parsing. You gotta learn the Greek. So yeah, I was a musician, and I kind of randomly discovered that my brain is good at this, and now I feel as though I have sort of a responsibility to keep going. Yeah. This is a great question. For now, all that we can do, that I have not proven that Martha has been added to the Gospel of John. It's just a theory. For those of you who know biblical scholarship, have you ever heard of Q? This mysterious text that Matthew and Luke had access to? that we don't have anymore. Nobody's ever found a copy of Q, but a lot of people believe that Q existed based on XYZ. It's kind of like that. We do not have any copy of the Gospel of John where Martha is absent. I can show you dozens of copies where the name Mary's getting crossed out or where Mary's doing something that you expect Martha to do. There's like a lot of smoke, but no fire, right? It's like there's a lot of funny stuff happening around Martha, and you can reconstruct most of the chapter without Martha using real manuscripts, but we don't have a copy where Martha's gone. And my theory is that's because she got added too early. If you add her in the 2nd century, basically all the it's gonna make its way into every single surviving copy. And of course, back then, if you had a copy with only one sister, you'd say that's wrong, and you would throw it away, right? So I'm saying it didn't survive. So as of now, it's just a theory, and you cannot. But I haven't proven it, and they're not going to change the text based on a theory. So, but they could change the footnotes. And so that's what I'm really arguing for. So there's the main text, and that's what gets translated into basically all Bibles, the main Greek text, and then they've got a bunch of footnotes showing manuscript variations. And I'm trying to get some of these readings I showed you in the PowerPoint this morning into the footnotes, so that people who are looking at the Greek critical edition will see, oh, look how funny, some manuscripts name Lazarus first in John 11:5, or some manuscripts say that Mary said the tomb stank, right? So these are the kinds of things I'm hoping to get into the footnotes. And once it's in the footnotes, then when your Bibles come out, the Bible translators can put a study Bible note saying, some ancient witnesses read Mary, or some ancient witnesses lack Martha. Have you seen that at the bottom of study Bible notes? I'm trying to get in the study Bible notes. That's my goal. Yeah. And so I think if I do a good job on Thursday, say some prayers. If I do a good job on Thursday when I'm presenting this in Münster, then I hope to persuade the committee to add a few changes that could make it into translations that will probably come out, let's say, maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 years from now. So it's a long process. Yeah. But only the footnotes. Oh, but you know what would put it back to just Lazarus and Mary is if we found a copy, a real copy. I don't want any forgeries. I want a real copy. If there's a real copy with just Lazarus and Mary, maybe the Vatican has it. You know, Pope Leo went to Villanova. And my boss, everybody knows him at Villanova. Oh, like I was just texting with Pope Leo. I'm at a pretty good location for this. I see like the Holy Spirit at work here. Because I've had this job for 3 years, and I'm like, oh wow, Pope Leo has my birthday. And I'm at the institution with all his friends. So maybe I'll get to chat with him, and who knows, maybe somewhere at the Vatican they've got a copy that they've been keeping under wraps. Something like that is what could actually change the text above the line. But we don't have anything like that right now. Yeah. Yeah, Pope Francis's elevation of her, yes. I would say that it's more the growing body of biblical scholarship that shows that Mary was not a prostitute. I should say sex worker, that Mary was not a sex worker. And it was part of standard Catholic teaching up until the 1960s to say that she was a sex worker. And then in the 1960s, they changed the Roman Missal, which is the readings associated with different saints' days. The reading associated with Mary Magdalene's Saint's Day used to be that sinful woman from Luke, which doesn't make any sense because it doesn't say her name anywhere. And in Luke's gospel, that's a totally different person than Mary Magdalene. So it didn't make any sense. And so the rise of critical scholarship in the 1960s, the Vatican's like, we're going to put the encounter with Jesus in John chapter 20 on her day instead. So they changed the reading for her feast day in the 1960s. And as time has gone on, more and more scholarship has called to attention that it never says that Mary Magdalene's a sex worker anywhere. That sinner from the city in Luke is not Mary Magdalene, certainly not in Luke's gospel, not anywhere. It's really just Gregory the Great. And so it's just sort of reached a height of enough scholars saying something about it that Pope Francis said, okay, Mary Magdalene was the first person that Jesus appeared to, and so she should get her feast day to be just as prominent as the apostles. So her feast day is now at the same level as the apostles. And that's what he did. He elevated it to a feast day. Yeah. So it was more through like scholarship that he did that. Well, Tertullian says that in his treatise that's in around 200 AD, the one I presented this morning. He's a church father who wrote around the same time that Papyrus 66 was copied. And he said that she confessed Jesus as the Christ. But he says it without an extra comment. He's like, oh, Mary's the one who confessed Jesus as the Christ. So we don't have anybody complaining about Mary as the Christological confessor, but we do have a lot of documents complaining about Mary as being too close to Jesus. In the Gospel of Philip, the disciples complain, the one that says that she's his companion. This is a 2nd century gospel found at Nag Hammadi, which, by the way, is walking distance from where, it's like an hour's walk from where Papyrus 66 was found. They're very close. At Nag Hammadi, the Gospel of Philip says that Mary Magdalene was the companion of Christ and that he loved her and that the disciples are jealous of her. You also get the Gospel of Mary, which has been found in 3 or maybe 4 copies. There's a new fragment that might be a piece of the Gospel of Mary, Papyrus Oxyrhynchus 5577, that was just published in 2023. Sarah Parkhouse and I each have articles independently saying that we think this is another piece of the Gospel of Mary. The missing section of the Gospel of Mary, that's another conversation. In the Gospel of Mary, it says that Jesus loves her more than other women, Peter admits, and then Levi says he loved her more than us. And then Peter gets angry at Mary in the Gospel of Mary. So you see both of those documents, this sort of jealousy toward Mary for being close to Jesus. And then there's a document called the Pistis Sophia, which is a bit later, where Mary Magdalene is the best student and she answers all Jesus' questions correctly. And Peter says, Lord, tell this woman to be quiet, for she's taking the opportunity away from us. And then Mary says, I am scared of Peter, for he hates us. And it's like, these are ancient texts. And you're like, okay. So, and the thing that's interesting is that the Gospel of Mary, the Gospel of Philip, and the Pistis Sophia were all copied in different centuries and found in different places, which tells you that there was a long memory of a conflict, some problem to do with Mary being too smart or too close to Jesus, and that Peter had a problem with her. There's also the Gospel of Thomas, which was found at Nag Hammadi in the same book as the Gospel of Philip. And Peter says, let Mary leave us, for women are not worthy of life. And then Jesus says, no, every woman who makes herself male, I will make sure that they receive life. It's interesting. It has to do with ancient misogyny and assumptions that men are more spiritual than women. I don't think Jesus really said that. But it shows that there, again, was a memory of Peter having a real problem with Mary. So we've got like 4 texts that show a conflict around some sort of jealousy or discomfort with Mary as female and being close to Jesus and being included in this sort of leadership position. And it seems that Peter's the main guy who has a problem with her. And so none of them specifically talk about Mary as a Christological confessor, but they do, other than Tertullian, who just says she's the confessor and he doesn't have a problem with it. But these ancient texts do show a memory that lasts for quite a while of Peter and Mary in conflict, or Peter suppressing Mary's authority. Which part? In the Gospel of Mary or the Gospel of Thomas? Or? Well, yeah, it's not in the Bible, and you gotta wonder why not. Sorry, these are 2nd century texts, and some 2nd century or 1st century texts made it into the canon, and some did not, right? And you can imagine that a text that is calling out Peter for being a jerk is not going to make it into the canon, right? And so that's sort of something that I love about the Gospel of John. I think the Gospel of John might have tried to give a counterpoint to the synoptics that give Peter such a prominent place And John seems in some ways to be responding to that, and it elevates women to having, and the woman is the one who makes the central confession in John. And John made it into the canon. John is in the canon. That's part of the reason I love it so much. And this is what I'm saying with this idea that maybe the illness in the text is not unto death, but it is for the glory of God. I was just telling, I think I was telling Jan, or was I telling Charlotte? I forget which one of you I was telling. I was saying it in the car. That it was you? This idea that it really works with Johannine theology. The Gospel of John is the one that says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not comprehend it. Or you could translate it as, the darkness did not master it. The Gospel of John also says, there is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends. I think that Mary might have laid her life down for Peter. Peter could not take a gospel where Mary had that big of prominence. And I'm saying that in the text, the transmission, this memory of Mary, she has laid her life down for us. It was more important that we got the Gospel of John. So there's something actually very profound theologically about the possibility that Mary is supposed to have this big role in the Gospel of John, and she let herself get diminished for our sake, for the sheep, right? And it's in a story about death and resurrection. The Lazarus story is, other than Jesus' resurrection, it is the quintessential story of Jesus having the power to raise things to life. And Jesus even lets Lazarus die. Lazarus is there for 4 days, and Jesus purposely does not come. And to me, that's like, that is so meta. Is Mary's character, has she died in the text? And Jesus waits for us to be ready to see. And then there might be a resurrection that happens in the text of John. To me, John is a very profound book. It's kind of a scary book, honestly. And I have to say that my work with those manuscripts really deepened my faith. It gave me certainty. It really showed me this profound sense that Jesus is Lord, and even the word itself is wounded, just like Jesus' body is wounded by sin. But we cannot actually kill it. There comes a time when something that's bigger than death rises. And I think that might be what's going on when we can see all the manuscripts simultaneously. This is when I take off my history hat and I put on my theology hat. This is why this is not why I haven't been made an atheist by what we're looking at here, or that we can't trust the biblical text. It's like, no, actually, this text is operating in a way that's bigger than we thought. John is bigger than we thought it was. John is a living text. It can change with time, which, by the way, scholars already know. The story of the woman caught in adultery is in John's Gospel, but that's a later addition. And there's also, in John chapter 5, there's this little story of the angel at the pool that isn't in the oldest copies. The text of John changed, and that's okay. All scholars, in John 21, some people think that was added later. The text of John changed, and that's okay. It's not static. This biblical inerrantist insistence, I think, it's not aligning with the spirit of the gospel. I think that the gospel meets us where we are at. And at that time, in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th centuries, this kind of a character in the gospel, that's not where people were at. And maybe we're at that now. Maybe we've reached a place in human history where we can accept, where the spirit of truth can be received. So that's my sort of theological take on what might be going on there. I think I went a little off topic. Any other questions? We're at about 5:10, but we've still got time if anybody wants to chat. It's my pleasure. It's my pleasure. I'll also share another fun secret. They're making a Mary Magdalene special that's going to air on ABC on Easter, and Diane Sawyer's the host. And so I got to be interviewed by her, and it's going to be on ABC on Easter, and I'll talk about all this stuff. So turn on as long as it airs, ABC might lose its license or whatever, because that's where Jimmy Kimmel was. So as long as ABC has its license, it has been filmed, and it's scheduled to air on ABC and on Hulu. So please turn on your TVs on Easter to watch what I'll say this kind of stuff. Well, I'll put her on my list. I'm just telling you guys now, but I don't have they haven't edited it yet. It's just like me giving you a little secret. So we don't need to publicize it quite yet. But for the people who sign up on my newsletter and everything, I'll send out a little blast when it's confirmed, and then But this is the information that I have as of now. Yeah, it's real. It's real. It's a real thing that's happening in the gospel, and I think it's for our good. I think it's for the life of the church. I think it's for the life of the church. I hope, anyway. Yeah. Oh yeah. Tasha put out. It's in my purse right now. I don't mind if you look in there. There's nothing scary in there. Tasha put out like a little mailing list, and a few people signed up. If you sign up on this newsletter, don't worry, I'm not going to spam you because I don't have time. I'm grading papers, I'm writing papers, I'm traveling. I don't have time to write a newsletter, but when something big happens, I do send out a blast. And so if you sign up on there, I will send out an email tonight to everybody who signs up with a link to read the Harvard article. And I can send you a link to a newspaper. It's like they did talk about it in National Geographic, but that one has a paywall. But there's a Religion News Service article that summarizes the article I just gave you here, and I'll send both of those so you can read the research for yourself. I'll send that to everybody who signs up. Yeah, and then I'll put you on my newsletter, but I think I send out like 3 emails a year or something these days. I just don't have time. Yeah, any other questions? Sure. That's fine. Yeah. They are. Yes, that's the one diversity that they do represent. Yes, they've got Protestants, Catholics, and Orthodox on the committee. Orthodox is, yeah, and I was wagging my finger. I was like, I'm glad you got Orthodox and Catholics and Protestants represented, but 50% of Christians are women, and you have 0 on the committee. And he's like, well, that's true. And I'm like, couldn't you have made sure that the diversity included gender, not just denomination? Or how about race? Or, I think they're all European right now. And I'm like, couldn't you? I mean, this is literally the text, the Greek critical text that all Bibles worldwide get translated from. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I just hope they don't ask me to be on the committee. That doesn't sound fun to me. I want to wag my finger at them or give them ideas. I don't want to have that kind of a responsibility. Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? Okay. Well, thank you so much.